Hello, this is Dr. Saldivar. In today's video, we'll be discussing how to email your professor. By writing an email that is clear, respectful, and professional, you'll not only get your professor to pay attention to your email, you'll also increase the chances that your question, your concern is understood clearly, which in turn means your professor will be able to answer that question or address that concern because they'll have no question, no misunderstanding about what exactly it is that you are trying to say.
The first place to start with any email, whether it's to one of your professors or anyone else, is with an email subject line. Try and be as descriptive as possible so that the person receiving the email knows immediately what the subject is, what it is you need to discuss or communicate to them. Next, you want to start by being polite, so begin with what's called a salutation. At the university level, some professors have doctorates and some don't, so it's always safest to address someone as professor. And also, of course, include their last name. Never address a professor by anything else other than their last name unless they've specifically asked you to do so. Then you want to identify yourself. Recall that at the university level, professors can have dozens or even hundreds of students, and although most professors do want to get to know their students individually, especially if it's the beginning of the semester or if it's a semester where they're teaching a particularly large number of classes, that can be tough. So always make sure that you identify yourself by name as well as what course you're writing about and when that course meets. That will help your professor make sure that they can identify you. Next, you want to be explicit about what the situation is. Why are you writing the email? If you have a question, be sure to state that explicitly. It also can help your professor be more efficient if you explain how or why you became confused or got off track in trying to understand something. This is optional, but you may also consider adding a description of what you've already done to try and find an answer. That way you can help the professor understand what you're working on, and it can, again, make their response even more effective because they're not asking you to do something that you might have already tried to do. Finally, at the end of the email, you want to be explicit about asking for assistance. What exactly do you expect or need for the professor to do? Do you want them to offer some examples to help you figure something out? Do you want them to restate an idea that you've read about in the textbook or in some other reading in order to prevent any misunderstanding? And then, of course, close out your email by thanking them for their time and restating your own name. Let's look at a more concrete example. This is an example where a student is asking for help with a question for a psychology class about operant conditioning. So here they're starting out with, shown in red, the subject line of the email, explicitly stating they have a question about operant conditioning. This is a concept from psychology. Then they address the professor by name. This is a polite way to start any email. The student identifies herself as being Mary from Psychology 1301 that meets on Wednesdays at 2 p.m. They explicitly state that there's a question about this concept of operant conditioning. She's not sure how it's different from classical conditioning. Again, these are both concepts from psychology, but what the ideas are less important than the fact that the student is communicating clearly about where they're confused, where they went off track. She also adds that she's read through the section in the textbook on these topics a couple times and is still struggling. Again, adding this kind of information about what you've already done or how you have tried to solve the problem or develop an understanding is very helpful to communicate to the professor because that way you'll prevent them saying, well, read page 20 and 21 in the textbook. If you've already done that, then you're letting them know that you have, so they won't repeat that information. Instead, they can offer you a more concrete or a more appropriate form of assistance. The student concludes the email by asking for, in this case, specific examples of these concepts to try and get a better understanding. Again, this is an important thing, so you want to finish off the email by creating an expectation or making a specific request as opposed to just writing an email saying, I don't understand, and leaving it at that. And then finally, the student thanks the professor and includes her name one more time so that if the professor needs to identify the student directly, for some reason, or wants to try and perhaps look through the records. If you have a question about a test, an exam, the professor can know exactly who the student is that's communicating with them. They can more easily find that information and again be able to give the best response.
This concludes the video. I hope you found it helpful. If you did, I would greatly appreciate it if you would click on the like button below. It would also really help my YouTube channel if you would subscribe and click on the bell icon to receive notifications of future videos. On my channel, I cover a number of topics related to college success, as well as topics in psychology, which is my field. So I hope you will subscribe, and I hope to see you here on the channel again for future videos. Take care.